and pass it over to Deb and Miriam.
Deb, you want to start?
Yeah, I just unmuted. And I'm gonna give Jerry a heads up that Jerry, you're up in about a minute. Just as a general introduction, I want to say that the free school is by definition grassroots generated, and it cannot be separated from community. That's why A.S. Neal's motto is freedom, not license. Free schools are all created by groups of people getting together to help each other to learn. In the free school, liberation, responsibility, and care go hand in hand. And the current generation of free schools, some of which have been operating since the 60s, have multiple roots that go back over centuries. They're entwined with the democratic struggle to shake off monarchies and to devolve power from the clergy and hereditary elites to the people. People helped one another to become literate so they could crack the codes that ruled them. People learned together organically in supportive multi-age communities ever since our species began. So my feeling is that our mass coercive education system is actually the new thing that really hasn't proven itself. Nonetheless, we do find ourselves on the defensive. A century ago, grassroots libertarian schools were popping up all over Europe as part of all the education movements that were happening. But A.S. Neal's Summerhill, started in 1921, survived. A book about it was published in 1960 that, along with a generation of radical teacher critics like John Holt, Jonathan Kozol, and Herbert Cole, inspired the free school movement, in which hundreds of grassroots schools were created worldwide by parents, educators, and students. Our special guest today is Jerry Mintz, who was there. I'm so thrilled that Jerry is here because he created schools. He worked with other educators ever since the 1960s, mentoring and helping. He's the founding and current director of the Alternative Education Resource Organization, which we refer to as ARROW. It continues to help parents, students, and grassroots schools to survive and thrive. Jerry said he can speak for 10 minutes or 10 hours on history, so I'm gonna let him get started.
Okay, well, I'll just go for 10 hours, I guess.
That's easiest.
So, well, I mean, these things popped up because they were based on what people could see in front of their eyes, that children were natural learners. And the public school system is the way it is because people had certain agendas when that system was created. And it wasn't necessarily to help kids find themselves or find their voice or empower them, or that just wasn't the main purpose. Purpose was more likely to get them ready to work in factories and follow orders and that sort of thing. So.
Oh, you're hungry? Okay, talk just a sec.
But no.
Can you mute Monica, please?
She did.
Okay.
So as I said, if you go back to Rousseau and the Emile, hundreds of years ago, many hundreds, he talked about what education should be like, and it was based on the idea that children are natural learners. But if you really understand what that means, you can't do things the way they've evolved to operate. In other words, homework makes no sense unless kids want to do stuff after school, which is fine. But if you're making them learn something that they wouldn't otherwise want to learn, if you're forcing them to learn something, you extinguish that natural ability to learn. So people kept on discovering these things, you know, Maria Montessori, John Dewey, you know, they discovered this and it came up with different forms of trying to find a learner-centered approach. And A.S. Neal, as Deb mentioned, started Summerhill School in 1921, 100 years ago. They are celebrating their 100th birthday this year. And in 1960, a book, which was a compendium of a lot of things he'd written up to that point, was published. And then that kind of led to the free school movement. The funny thing was, I didn't really know about that when I started my school in 1968. I started a school then and ran it for 17 years. It just seemed like the logical way to do it, you see. And I had actually done stuff before that democratically that just seemed like the way to do it. Back when I was 15 years old, I organized all my friends into something we called the Thinkers Club. And we sort of made what I realized later on was a free school. And we just discussed anything we wanted to. And you know, there was no adult supervision. We just did it. We got guest speakers if we didn't know the answers to things and so on. So the school that I started ran democratically. All the decisions were made by democratic vote. Students didn't have to go to classes they weren't interested in. They could ask for any class they wanted to go to. And we also traveled all over the place. If we had a small budget, we probably wouldn't have been able to go very far. Because we had no budget and most of our students were low income, we went any place we wanted because we had to raise the money as we went along. And we learned how to do that. And so we went to almost every state. So we did stuff then that you probably, well, I know you couldn't really do today, which is sort of ironic, isn't it? For example, one of the students went into a meeting and said, well, we've gone just about everywhere you can go in the continental United States. Let's go someplace off the continent. Of course, we always went in our van and we said, well, that would probably get pretty wet after about 10 feet or so. So how should we do that? And so they looked on the map and they said, well, you know, the Bahamas is only about this far away. Why don't we go there? We called the Bahamas Tourist Bureau and we said, if we can get to the Bahamas, would we have a place we could put our sleeping bags down, maybe places we could speak and so on. And they got back to us and I said, yeah, the People to People organization would be happy to host you. And the Orange Hill Guest House would be.
Talk to Dad. He's in charge of dinner.
Monica, you got unmuted again for some reason.
Sorry.
And then we called the airlines and we said, hey, you know, we've been invited to go to the Bahamas. We have places to go, places to sleep. We just need transportation. First airline turned us down, but Bahamas Air said, well, if you can get down to Florida, we might be able to take you. We were in Vermont. So we took a vote and decided to go. And we started to work our way down the coast. Halfway down, we called them and they said, we'll let you go for half price. I said, hey, these are low income kids. And we can't afford it. And they said, well, keep in touch. We got down to the Keys and he said, well, come to Miami tomorrow. We'll fly you over there. And we did. And we went there. We were there for 5 days and met by the Lutheran Church bus and stayed at the Orange Hill Guest House and so on. So I don't know if you could do that today. I don't know. I don't think so. But that's the kind of thing that we did in, you know, at that point. So it's funny you mentioned the Senecas, the Ojibwe, the Iroquois Confederacy. In our first year, we heard about a bridge blockade that was taking place at the Akwesasne Reservation in upstate New York. And so we went over there to find out more about it and found out that they were being charged taxes to go from one part of their reservation to another. One was, part of it was in New York and the other was in Ontario, and actually a third was in Quebec. It's where they all come together. And so they blockaded the bridge to protest this. So we got to meet all of them. And this was in 1968, including some of the people who eventually became leaders in the American Indian movement. And in 1971, we got a call from someone over there who said 70 Mohawk kids wanted to learn their own language and culture, and they were kicked out. And could we come over and show them how to start a school? And so we went over there, and I remember there were 70 people crammed into this little house, and we talked to them about how you would start a school. And they said, oh, don't we need the government's help? And we said, no, you should do it on your own. And a week later, they started the first Indian Way school, and in their backyard. This next year, there was another one started on Mercier Island across from Montreal. And that led eventually to the North American Indian survival school movement. By the way, the Iroquois and the Mohawks don't mind being called Indians. And so now that survival school movement has spread all over North America, and a lot of people have used it. What happened then is it was the Indian Way school. They learned, they were able to retain their language and culture and crafts. And then what happened is the Canadian government would always be happy to do anything against Quebec. And so they said, we'll pay for that. Because Rene Lévesque was trying to call all Indians immigrants. And they knew at least that they weren't immigrants. So,
Jerry, sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know it's been about 10. So if you can just wrap up wherever you are, and then we'll pass it back to Deb.
Can I just ask Jerry briefly, Jerry, about how many schools were started at the same time you started your school, and where were they?
well, there were about 1,500. And they were all over the place because people were very inspired, and then a certain number of them survived till today. So, yeah, that this was, and of course that led a few years later to the alternative school movement, where the public schools tried to create alternatives, and then that was pretty cool. The oldest public alternatives were pretty cool. Then that was kind of co-opted, and people used that idea of alternative education as a kind of a dumping ground for some of their kids. But there are still some good ones. It's just hard to tell which are which. So, yeah, that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. I could listen to you for a lot longer, but I'd like to let everyone know there will be lots of time for questions. So you can ask any of us questions a little later. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about how that movement worked in Toronto. There were many free schools started at the time that Jerry was starting his, and they took so many different forms. There were some classic free schools in the Summerhill model, which is rural and boarding schools, and Everdale Place was the most famous of those. And there were also urban free schools, including many of those were started by students who were sick of being disengaged and used. And in those days, we must remember that there were a whole lot of other movements happening at the same time. There were movements for housing, there were movements for food security. There were a lot of arts organizations created in a country where there hadn't been, the opportunities for arts. And so the free school movement was actually, like many of these movements, like the gay rights movements even was based on the battle of the most oppressed people on this continent. It was based on the civil rights movement. When Blacks stood up for their rights, and that in the 60s, they had only recently being able to vote legally. The same with the indigenous people up here. They only got the legal right to vote in 1960. And in the States, it was still a physical battle, and many people were killed trying to exercise their right to vote. So it was a very, very hard time. At the same time, it was the war in Vietnam, and many young people who had been brought up to detest fascism, which their parents had fought in Europe, saw the war in Vietnam as a fascist and an imperialist war, and they were being drafted and sent over to kill there. So it was crazy, and it was a big fight. A lot of draft dodgers came to Canada. They lent a lot of their high energy to things that were happening here. And one thing that I heard from a couple of people who came up from the US is Canada is different. You can actually talk to the government here. We think we can actually work with the government here. So these independent free schools did very well, and they're at that time too, like the fight for the 40-day work week had been successful, and the returning veterans were not people to mess with. They were brought up being able to actually build and do and farm, and they knew how to use a gun. So there was actually a really decent kind of a work week happening. People had time to volunteer. Rents were low, so there were a lot of free spaces people used for their free schools. But even with all that high energy, there were some marvelous schools. And I'm just going to mention one, Urban School Mother, that was created. They wrote even a little book about the free school called the Free School Handbook, all about independent, self-created free schools, mostly created by students. And they said that a great part of the education was actually the creation and running of the school itself, that learning democracy by doing democracy and creating your own community was the greatest thing that taught them. But they were not slouches. They did very well. They all did very well. But these schools were not able to last. There seems to be a big difference between Canada and the US and Europe in that the independent free schools, the ones that charged money, like the rural ones had to charge tuition. There just doesn't seem to be the demographic that really wants their children to live democratically in a democratic society, and yet can afford to pay tuition. So there was a very strong impetus to start the alternative schools. The first one was called Magoo, and Magoo lasted about 10 years. And at about the same time, Seed started. And it was actually originally created to respond to the crisis of youth unemployment. And the governments actually had pretty creative ways of doing it in those days. Of helping youth with unemployment. There was also a very, very temporarily, like it only lasted for a few years, but there was quite a progressive radical school board in at the time. And the head of that school board, Ying Hope, suggested that there be a summer program, a summer free school program, and a couple of great teachers. I'm going to acknowledge Les Birmingham, who just died this week, and the late Murray Shukin were working together at Dewson School, and they got together and started they had space at the Board of Education downtown. And when they were looking for students, they were in big trouble. Nobody would come. But I talked to one of the, Les called up one of his students, and his students, this guy got on the phone and he brought in kids, and from there on it mushroomed. And there were several hundred kids who really wanted to work to go to Seed in the summer. And the kids actually found their own resource people, people who had a skill at something, anything from hypnotism to magic, to Ying Hope taught Oriental philosophy. Our famous writer June Colwood taught there. So that's how Seed started. And within 2 years, the Seed students were agitating for that to be a full-time high school. They broke through the Toronto board. McGill was at another board. It was in North York, which is not then part of our board. And once Seed broke through, parents wanted to start an elementary school so that their kids could start out learning in the way that they felt kids should learn. So that's how Alpha parents got together, and they met for close to a year and had discussions, and apparently they couldn't agree on much and their arguments would continue. But a rather terrific person who did not end up liking what happened with Alpha, but the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, University of Toronto, there's a professor, Roger Simon, who actually worked also with Malcolm Levin, who started Magoo, to make Alpha's proposal that was accepted by the board. And at the same time, there was a wonderful school called Laneway, which was started by the Trefan Court mothers. And they had a very burning concern. Their kids were being dead-ended into what they called opportunity classes. And they wanted real help for their kids. They wanted a real school that would help their kids. They weren't much interested in freedom or the kids having a great day, but they were very interested in their kids being properly mentored. And they had been operating their own school out of a community center. They approached the board and they are also accepted. So there are suddenly three of these schools out the board at once, and the alternative school system was started. Not too long after that, another school that started out independent was the Wandering Spirit Survival School, which started in the living room of Pauline Shirt and and Vern Harper. Yeah, they're partners, and their kids were being beaten up in schools and treated very bad by their teachers. So they started to teach them at home, and they taught other kids at home. And that was a great risk. Their kids could have been taken away by Children's Aid. But they approached the board, and they also got space for their school. And there have been many troubles since, but I'm going to hand it off to Miriam to talk about the 40 schools that are now in the alternative system.
Hi, everyone. So I just also wanted to say that I see lots of familiar names and some faces. I also wanted to say that we're just after this is over, we're not going to talk for 2 hours. We're going to get a chance for everyone to sort of talk a little bit about what might have brought them here as well. So you can be thinking about that. So I started out in inner city schools up at Jane and Finch, but I spent a lot of my career, basically the last 20 years of my career, either teaching or administrating alternative schools. And my oldest son, went through alternative schools basically from grade 1 through high school. So first thing I want to say in relation to democracy is that just making a democratic school in Toronto is a democratic process, right? So parents have to be able to, or students have to be able to come together. They have to be able to make some decisions together. They have to build some consensus around a vision, around a set of asks, in order to put a proposal into the board. The board, sort of has a sort of threshold for the number of people that have to be involved in order for that, in order for a space to be granted, in order for staff to be granted. And so it's just right from the get-go, it's a process that really encourages and builds sort of those democratic skills. The tension that occurs often with all alternative schools, and not all alternative schools are free schools. Alpha is the only one in Toronto that would call itself a democratic free school. But I would say that all of the alternative schools that I've been involved with do honor the democratic process, at least in relation to the way that the adults work in the building. Not always the way the kids work in the building. But one of the things that happens is there's this tension between basically a very democratic process that brings the school into being, and then being housed in an institution which is essentially hierarchical, right? So I was appointed the principal of Alpha Alternative School. I was not hired by Alpha parents or even by Alpha staff. I was appointed. There was some advocacy work that Alpha parents did in order to get me or someone like me as the principal of the school. But it's a very, it's not a sort of straight A to B kind of process with the parent voice. So that creates a bit of a conflict. And one of the things that I've observed in alternative schools, and in particular in Alpha, but in public schools in general, is that when that tension sort of emerges, then the challenge for the adults in the building very much is to stay with a democratic process and not get pulled into the hierarchical process, because for a lot of us, it's easier and it's the process that we know, right? So that when parents get upset about a thing that's happening, an example I can use is that, you know, there was some incidents, for example, at Alpha, where some people were wandering into the building from the community. There was even a theft. There was actually a couple of thefts. There was a lot of concern about the doors being open and these random people kind of walking into the building and what threat they might possess. So these are people's kids, and people got upset. And there were a number of people, in fact, one veteran parent who asked for the rule, which was the rule that all elementary schools have locked doors, which happened after the first big mass shooting in the US, that they basically lock the doors and that the superintendent make it the rule that it has to happen. That isn't the way that we make decisions at Alpha. So it was tough to kind of hold that line, both as a principal and for the community to kind of hold that line and say, no, we don't go to the hierarchy when we're scared or when it's inconvenient. We stick with the democratic process, which is slower, but we believe in that process because it allows all of those voices to be heard. So at Alpha, we have some things that I think make it a little bit different in sort of its democratic process from other alternative schools. So in most alternative schools, there is a monthly parent meeting. In fact, the board has now made that a thing, that there is a school council, which is made up of parents. In Alpha, there are no elected positions. In most other school councils, including most alternative schools, there are elected positions. And the other thing is that at Alpha, all decisions at all levels are made by consensus. And at some alternative schools, for example, I was part of the creation of the Grove and the beginning of the Grove. That school, I think, stays with the consensus model for adults, but not all alternative schools do. One of the things that I think is the most different about Alpha in its sort of democratic process is that usually council meetings or parent meetings at Alpha, their parent meetings start out with the principal talking. And that immediately sort of begins to shape the meeting, right? Because the principal then decides what they're going to report on, and that begins to shape the agenda for the meeting. Whereas at Alpha, we create the agenda together, and as a principal, I'm no more than one other voice. So I might add things to the agenda, but I don't make the agenda. The kids meet regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, depending on the schedule that's going on. And they meet as, cohorts. So upstairs kids and downstairs kids have their own meetings, as well as the whole school having its own meetings. And what I find really important is that I've watched kids debate issues that sometimes I can't stop myself from laughing out loud, because some of the things they're talking about and the ways that they're talking about them are just cute, for lack of a better word. But they're doing this very, very important work. A 4-year-old will tell a 12-year-old, this game that you're playing really feels unsafe for me, and I don't like it, and I want you to, and I want to be able to talk about it. And the 12-year-old will be able to say, well, this is the way the game is played, and these are the rules of the game, and let's talk about how we can make it so that that game being played on the schoolyard feels okay for you. And those are just really, really important skills. And my experience has been that when I talk to Alpha graduates, or I talk to students who are at their end of the time or at Alpha, or come back even in their first few years, is that they have the skills to think through problems and to think through things, and that all of the other skills that we get hyper focused on as educators, like reading and writing and being able to problem solve and math and all of those things, that the development of their synapses to do all those human things that are to form an opinion, to speak that opinion, to be able to negotiate with people whose opinion might be different, to be able to describe and reflect what someone else's position might be and figure out how their position can change in relation to that position, that all of those skills are skills that help them with those other things that we think really matter in education. And mostly they excel as they go forward because they have those skills. So that was all that I wanted to talk about. I have lots of examples I can share about moments where that played out at Alpha, but what we'd like to do right now, and it seems like we're not as big a group as we thought we might be. So Deb, you think it's okay if we just stay together? So what we were gonna just ask is, we want to know in sort of classic free school format, what it is that brought you to this class, what it was that interest you. And I'm just going to call people's name out because we don't have a talking piece and we're not sitting in a circle. I'm just going to call people's name out. And if you're not ready, just say pass and we'll go to, and you can pick the next person. So I'm going to start with Claire.
So I'm here because I started teaching at Alpha this year, although sadly I've had to go on leave for some family health reasons, but I have just enjoyed teaching at Alpha incredibly and just wanted to soak up more learning about the history, the roots, the philosophy of the free school movement. So super happy to be here.
So Rachel.
Hi, everyone. That was really terrific. I'm a parent at Alpha. I have a 7-year-old that goes to the school, and we've been off this year because of the pandemic and have really missed being there. You know, I was homeschooled myself as a child, and I was looking for something for Griffin, my 7-year-old, that would allow him to, you know, really follow his own interests and be part of a lot of what you've already talked about. You know, part of learning the skills of being part of a community and how to listen to other people's perspectives and how to think through problems and not be, you know, so focused on regimented things early on. I think partially because I didn't have that growing up myself, and I lived in, you know, the countryside, so it was a different setting, but I wanted something like that for Griffin growing up. And so coming to this, I was really keen to hear about how this free school movement started generally. So I really appreciated what Jerry brought to the table to describe his experience with it, and then Deb and Miriam as well, hearing how it got going in Canada and Toronto. So yeah, that's it.
Jim?
Hi, my name's Jim. Let's see, how did I get? I heard about this because of Miriam and I are in a group that's pushing for co-op housing, and then I also noticed that Deb O'Rourke was in it, in the announcement, and she and I both lived in Alexander Park at one point. So we many years ago we knew each other, and also a big chunk of my identity and an important chunk of my life was in fact getting connected to SEED, even relatively peripherally. I moved to Toronto in 1970 and got involved with the people at SEED. I also knew somebody who was at Everdale, who's still one of my closest friends. In the transition to it becoming official, I was not drawn in the lottery. So I was part of a thing, an offshoot of SEED called Toronto Winter Interest Groups, of Twig, of course. It is obviously the offshoot of SEED. And so that happened, and that was basically a year. That was like my last year of high school. The other thing that happened was there was a tendril of the free school movement that actually made it into the universities. In particular at the University of Waterloo, which was, okay, it in fact started because the son of the president wanted to study computers without taking calculus. And the arts department, our arts faculty was not politically strong enough to prevent a free school from opening. The other thing that was interesting at that level was one of the cute things I thought was in the official description. There was a thing that said, this is an official program of the University of Waterloo, and therefore you must meet all the official admission requirements. However, given the nature of this program, consideration will be given to people who do not make formal qualifications. Translation: if you weren't bored out of your skull in grade 13, why are you applying to this program? And there was all kinds of interesting chaos happening in that. There was like a lot of tension between the administration and the school, but and I understand it's not clear to I have not been connected to it for quite some time, so I'm not quite sure what its current state is, although I have heard that it has in fact continued. Probably its most, in fact, it turns out that Corey Doctorow and I basically went through both SEED and integrated studies, so he's probably the most famous graduate. Anyway, so essentially the reason I'm here is for substantially personal reasons and my own history. So I get to bore you with to tears with all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Catherine and Emily?
Sure. Hi, do you want to go? Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I currently am teaching at Alexander Mere Gladstone, teaching grade 8, and that's the school building that also houses the Grove. So I've gotten to see the Grove in action sort of from the side for the past few years. And I'm here because I'm interested generally in sharing more power with my students than traditionally, like in traditional public schools that teachers share with their students, and interested as well in how we can make learning more student-centered within a hierarchical institution, within a traditional public school setting. I found it difficult to some extent to get kids to think more independently and creatively, like when there are no boundaries or when they have a lot of choice. I notice my students freezing, And I'm sure it comes from many years of not having a lot of choice, and not training that muscle of like really imagining widely, like anything could be possible. So that's challenging. And also, as I think about how I want to do things, I'm often thinking about like the parent community too. And so there's just like a lot of tensions between what my ideal classroom would be like and also what I feel is possible within my specific context, and also what level of risk am I willing to take. Will the students meet me there? Will the parents meet me there? Will they be like, what's going on in this classroom? So that's part of what brings me here. I'll let Catherine introduce herself.
Cool. Yeah. I'm Catherine. I feel like so many things bring me here, and this is like an intersection of a lot of different interests. I also by trade am a teacher, and so in that, like, I think echoing Emily's sentiments, in that respect, I also am interested in, like, outside of formal educational contexts, what different sorts of like learning, mutual learning can look like. So I have had, so many nourishing experiences in fairly formal classroom settings, but by far the most salient learning that I've done in my life, like, but be that intellectual, emotional, political, has happened outside of formal settings, and that doesn't mean that there's not, a bunch of intentionality, obviously, that goes into what those can look like. But yeah, really interested to like learn more about the history of people, also interested in these same questions, like in this place that we live, and really appreciate all the insights so far. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Diane?
Hi, everyone. It occurs to me that for people who aren't involved with Alpha Alternative School right now, you may not realize that about half the people on this call have like a direct connection to Alpha, either as parents or teachers or something like that. So I am a teacher at Alpha currently, and my son attended and just graduated a couple of years ago. So I'm here just to learn more, think more together with other people about ways to make school a place where kids thrive, really. I don't want to speak for long, but lately I'm keen to figure out how the model that we do at Alpha, which I really believe in, and it's always changing, but it's a really rich model, and I feel like the world doesn't know about what we do, and I just want to figure out how to shine a light on what happens at Alpha and get the word out there more, because I think that could really help public education in general. That's it for me.
Thanks, Sam. Emily?
Hi, everyone. I am also a co-conspirator at Alpha Alternative School. I am a teacher. I've been a teacher since 2007 at Alpha, and a parent. So I have a 15-year-old kid. She's in high school now, who came through Alpha, and a 10-year-old kid who's right now at Alpha. And I've grown up a bit at Alpha myself. I actually come from a long my life has been around community activism and community organizing. And so I knew that I wanted to work with kids. And the only way I could really figure out how to work with kids was to be able to practice, as Emily said. I just want to create some synergy here around sharing power in school. And so I was actually really afraid of becoming a teacher. I was like an artist in school and a guest facilitator for many years, trying to do work outside the system, but be there because that's where kids are. So my interest, in addition to being in a non-hierarchical community environment of schooling, is also to be in a fundamentally anti-oppressive environment, which to me is around sort of bringing an anti-racist lens to the school, something that I came up against. I'll just name this because it hasn't been named yet. Something that I came up against in the school when I first started was that the school was just transitioning to an equity admissions process to diversify the school community. When I arrived at the school, it was a very white community. And so I actually came on a wave of parents in the last 3 years before I arrived who had been working really hard to bring about an equity admissions process, which I will say now proudly that though it was kind of not an accepted, like officially accepted TDSB policy, some really strong, this is the way the board works, which is really interesting. And I learned as a community organizer to just like shut up and listen to the higher ups. And they, you know, some like executive superintendent tells you to like be quiet, just keep doing what you're doing because what you're doing is great. With equity admissions, which was an active way to address the inequity in the school in terms of representing Toronto's diversity. So yeah, we were able to sort of employ an equity admissions model. So we now have, you know, a really great and, you know, fairly diverse, though, you know, of course, there's lots of room for improvement on that. But we have a much more diverse community than it was when I first started at Alpha. So I want to put that out there that I want to just like riff off and echo off of what Diane said, that what Alpha does is so off the charts in terms of, you know, a different model from mainstream education. And also, I think it really serves people who have experienced real trauma due to racism and hierarchy in their own educational experiences. And so I would just say that's something that I'm really proud of, that, you know, we really strive to not be an elitist organization by making sure that we kind of, you know, do our part to represent Toronto and to stand up against racism, etc. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. Zio?
All right. Well, I taught at Alpha 2 when it began, and I've been teaching at Alpha for a while too. And I do have kids who graduated. Actually, why I was off screen at the beginning was because I was driving my daughter home, and she was loving listening to this. She was like, "Oh, this is kind of fun," because she's 21 now, and she went to Alpha and Alpha 2, and is now in college, and hearing about that. But one of the reasons I feel the need to go to workshops like this is because I find the draw or the push or the trust in kids diminishes as fear grows. And so they're inversely proportional. And with the fear that's going on now, I find, if anything, adults trust kids less. And I just need to reinvigorate my belief in kids' natural instinct to learn, and hearing the stories that Jerry was saying at the beginning about getting Bahamas, you know, those are the kinds of things that I want to be reminded of, that you just take it on without fear and you make things happen, and kids are amazing for that. And so I need to come to these workshops just to reinvigorate that in myself and remind myself that what we're doing is good.
Thanks, Seal. Lei?
Hello, my name is Lei. I'm also Alpha parents. My son graduated last year. My daughter now is in Diane's learning path. She is grade 4, and I was totally inspired by Alpha experience. So it's take a lot of effort and also courage. And then I finally become a teacher last year, and this year I was so lucky, and I got the LTO job at Alpha. So I'm trying to learning how to translate from parents' perspective and then the teacher perspective. Sometimes I'm so lost. I don't know where my balance is, because before that I'm like a totally parents perspective, and now like I'm teacher. Oh, that's so difficult for teachers. I recognize how much efforts our teacher put every day in the school, and every day like there's something happens, they have to creatively solve the issues. And also I'm taking Casey's teaching conflict and conflict resolution course at OEZ. I really love that courses that recommended by Diane. So I'm really interested in like Alpha way, like a conflict resolution. And also since I started to be a supply teacher last year, I got to compare the kids from a regular school, regular class, and with the kids at Alpha Kids, and then I was totally amazed and confirmed like my kids are so lucky. All Alpha Kids are lucky. Like I can compare why Alpha Kids really are strong and powerful, because they just know what they need. They know how to study by themselves. Mostly like I feel like most kids kind of constructivist kids, because they just figure out the problem by themselves. They have initiative to learn how to learn things. But when I bring Alpha ways of teaching or learning into a regular class and a regular school, the kids will what I should do? Can you, like just ask me a lot of questions. They were so confused, so lost. So I have to provide a lot of instructions and help them, because they are so scared to make their own choices, and also they are so lost. And some kids, that's the kind of one type kind of kids, and other type like they get to be crazy. Oh, I got a lot of choices. Oh, then I kind of lost all of them. I can handle the classroom management, and oh, they running here, and then they got a lot of choices. Like they go in other extremely way. I'm trying to find the balance how I do this. Another things at Alpha, like a teacher and they usually co-construct the learning experience with the kids, and then I kind of question myself. Yeah, the kids have choices, they have strengths and interests, but as a teacher, we also have our strengths and interests. So how I combine my own strengths with the kids' interests and strengths, like I'm kind of lost. So because right now I'm trying, I think my mentor teacher, Diane, Zio, Emily kind of show me like we have to co-construct the lesson plan with the kids, listen to them, like let them to lead learnings, yes. But just in case their interests and their learning strengths not match with mine, like how can I do it? I got the trouble. That's a kind of challenge for me now. And also now I'm thinking not all teacher can match all their interests and strengths. Like, so I have to continue training myself, because for me, I also have a weakness, and for my weakness is like music. But like Alpha, I know my kids learning all ukulele, guitar, singing, lots of things as Alpha. But when I become a teacher, that's kind of my weakness. Even I'm really try really hard. And then last summer, I learned how to play ukulele, start singing songs. I'm scared, but I'm getting there. So, but like I'm thinking, yeah, I'm trainable, I'm very trainable. I can learn everything, but still, I need the confidence and the practice, singing with the kids. So like I really make effort to overcome my weakness, like have the growth mindset, even I'm not good at right now, I can showcase I'm really not good at right now, but I'm still trying. So we can learn together, we can sing together. That's kind of my thing, but still, I want to be a little bit better. So I'm coming here, I just trying to hear other people's experience and stories. So maybe can help me to answer some questions I have, so I can overcome all those challenges to be a better teacher. That's it.
Thanks, Lee. Soraya.
So, hi, my name is Soraya. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces. And I have 2 kids at Alpha in grade 3. And I also work as an SNA in another school. And I came to this talk to be inspired. I wanted to get some inspiration for my girls and for my work, because I feel like this last year has brought a lot of anxiety in us. And I think that when we believe in our kids having choices and having freedom, and then we get stressed, then we go to the easy way of solving problems that we were taught and we were used to, and work more effectively. And I want to be inspired not to do that, and inspire others around me not to do that, and also bring to the regular school where I work, because I do believe that if we are preparing children to live in a democracy, how is the school not going to be a democracy? That it doesn't make any sense unless we want to pretend to prepare kids to live in a dictatorship. Schools should look more like the society that we are co-creating. And I do agree with something that was said in this tonight about the democratic process being slow. And yeah, it's slower and it's harder, but I also think that it's more effective. Because when you sit down with kids and you tell them what are the rules, what are we going to do, this is the plan, and even if the kids are not used to the freedom and the choices, when you listen to them, even if you come to what you mind and the agenda that you had in the beginning, you come up together with them to that plan. When it's their idea and they're part of it, then it's more effective and they're more likely to follow those rules if they were part of it. And I think we should keep that in mind. So I read what the tonight's talk was. The name was How Free Schools Foster Democratic Citizenship, and I wanted to come with my eyes closed.
Thanks, Soraya. Monica?
Hi, my name is Monica Trong. I'm from Alberta. So it's the one province in Canada that allows charter schools. So they're publicly funded, but kind of private schools, in that they can have their own philosophy, like the democratic model, possibly. I'm very interested in creating a charter school based on what you guys have done in Alpha. Yeah, and I'm homeschooling my girls right now, but I helped to start a homeschool kind of co-op learning circle, which is democratically based, like Sudbury inspired. I like to say we don't follow it excessively. We do our own thing a bit too, but we really want it to be a space where kids make their own decisions and have their own little judicial council for infractions and so on. And we ran that for about 2 years. So I really want to hear how things work in Alpha. And I'd like very much to copy and paste into Calgary. Thank you.
Monica. Aaron?
Hi, everyone. I'm the current vice principal at Alpha. I've been there, this is my 3rd year at Alpha. The reason why I came on this today was to continue my deep learning of what Alpha is, where Alpha came from, and where is Alpha going. I heard a lot of teachers and staff talk about the kids and what that is like. And I have to say Alpha is the epitome of engagement versus compliance. Kids want to be at school. Why? Because the teachers love what they do, and that really draws the kids in to do what the teachers co-create with the kids every day. And there's a reason to be at school because it's fun, because it's things that they want to actually do. So that's me.
Thanks, Aaron. Ivan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivan Beekmans. A little background about me. I'm Toronto born and raised, but I've had a 20 some odd year career as an international teacher. And I've come back home with my family. And the goal is to open a self-directed learning pod or center next September. And as you can imagine, given the pandemic, it's really hard to even start to embark on such a thing. And it's been a real education listening to how others have taken this kind of vision and brought it to fruition. It's interesting to get a sense of the history. I was aware of some of the alternative schools as I grew up in Toronto, but I really didn't know what they were and how they got started and how they've been maintained. And getting a little bit of perspective is both humbling and challenging, but it's also, I mean, when you have a crisis like we have right now, and I would guess that we had quite a bit of crisis back in the 60s and 70s, good things come out of it. And I'm hoping the same will happen with this learning pod. My eldest son is really keen. His main goal right now is to be able to build his own computer. And when I told him that, well, if you were doing a self-directed learning pod, you could do that full time. And he just, his eyebrows raised and talked to a few friends. And then 2 days later, he's saying, so when does this start? So now I've got even more of a motivation to try and get this off the ground. But that's where I'm coming from. So it's been really a treat to, but and Deb told me about this. Deb O'Rourke told me that this was happening tonight. So I thought I would join and see how things have come along. It's been an education. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivan. Sophia?
Hi, everybody. I'm afraid I'm out walking, so I didn't expect that I would have to say anything, but so I'm an Alpha parent too. We are an Alpha family, and we enjoy it very much. I'm here today so to be reminded of why we're doing this, because it's not easy. But we love Alpha. When I didn't even know that such schools exist. So when we started looking for schools, I got anxiety because I knew that my son would not fit in and I would have to fight every day. So it feels good to have found Alpha and be there. My son came home the other day and she says, Mom, my teacher is smiling. I think he's happy. That is the best lesson anybody could give him. I remember my teacher, he was angry. We got punished a lot. So he's gonna go through life remembering happy faces, and you know, he wakes up and he wants to go to school. And that is very rare to see. Also, there's always the wish of going back to home, which is Greece. And maybe we could bring some of Alpha wisdom back with us. So that's why I'm here today. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just walking. I'm tired. That's it for me.
Say a few words.
Would you say, Miriam?
Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I missed that part. Yeah, so just a bit more context. I mean, the Parkdale Free School is coming from a bit of a different background, much more of like a radical anarchist social justice slant. But definitely I hear a lot of overlap. Kind of questions that came to mind for me are just, around organizing and thinking about the issue of solidarity. And it was kind of said a couple of times, like, oh, I wish that there was a way to make a larger presence, and there are all these other projects going on. And so my natural question is around, are there ways to start to build those networks, either between the student groups, between teachers at different schools who are kind of interested in a social justice angle, an equity angle, or even just learning from different experiences of how to maybe push the envelope. I'd be interested in that because I'm not in the public system, so I don't know what the pressures are. And the other question that just occurred to me that when Deb was talking and kind of suggesting that there are a lot of arguments, and there's a lot of conflicts that come up. And from the two of you having been in it for so long and maybe seeing a lot of the same tensions coming up, are there lessons learned? Are there things to avoid, things to ways to have a more constructive argument, issues that lead nowhere? That kind of very experiential question of navigating conflicts that come up between different stakeholder groups. So those are the kind of questions that came to mind for me.
Thanks, Andrew. And Jerry, do you want to add anything else to what you've already said?
Of course. So I'm here because Deb asked me, and it's what I do. And when I say it's what I do, the name of our website is educationrevolution.org. Write that down, educationrevolution.org. And that's what our goal has been, the education revolution. And guess what? It just happened. So we went from maybe less than 5% of people involved with doing some sort of alternative to the mainstream to 90%. That means, even though in a lot of cases, people who are making their presentations by Zoom or whatever were trying to duplicate what they did in the classroom, everything was actually different. And all of a sudden, all those literally millions of people in this country and billions around the world discovered that they were not stuck with the school they were assigned to, that they had choices, that there were things that they could do differently. So our job became a lot harder, because our job is to keep that going rather than allow the counter revolution to happen and everyone try to retreat back. They won't be able to, by the way, but a lot of people in the system think they can. So that's it.
Thanks, Jerry. So we had just thought that the last part of the class would be a lot of questions and answers. There were a lot of themes brought up in just even people's reasons for coming. And I can go through those, but if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat. Andrew's going to monitor the chat, or you can even raise your hand if you're not comfortable typing in the chat, that's fine. And we can just have a little bit of a free-flowing discussion from here on in. We do want to save a little bit of time at the end to just maybe add any pieces if we were to continue this as a series, because Deb and I both have some energy to do that. What kinds of things would people like to continue to explore? So you can be thinking about that as well. Jerry?
At some point, I can give feedback on some of the things that people brought up, because I made notes on some of those things whenever it's appropriate.
I'd like that, because we don't know if you'll be here next time, Jerry. So is it okay if we just let Jerry go ahead for a bit?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, Jerry, fire away.
Well, I try to be concise. Okay, so I'll kind of go backwards. So it was Sophia, I think, who talked about her kid waking up and wanting to go to school. At the school that I ran, the kid, this was in Vermont, by the way, lots of snow. There was a rule that said that under no circumstances shall there ever be a snow day. And they knew that I stayed in the school building, so if he's going to be there, we can always get there. And so they even tried to vote out the summer vacation one year, and we came in once a week, and then the staff said, forget it, we're not coming in anymore. But that's how much the kids wanted to be in the school. Someone brought up the thing of consensus. I'm just going to give my very brief opinion about consensus. I've seen it manipulated too much. And a minority kind of controlling things. And so I prefer a democratic process that we evolved through our interaction with the Mohawks in our early years. And it was based on how the Iroquois Confederacy operated. And essentially, when the decision was made, the minority was polled. If they wanted to, they got to say why they voted negatively, because they didn't always comment in the discussion. And then anybody who wanted to could ask for a revote with discussion. But if there was ever not anybody who wanted to bring something up, then it was passed and we went on. So it was not the same thing. It was my honoring the minority, but it was not consensus in the usual way that people do it. Someone talked about the idea of the agenda and adults sort of pushing the agenda. You know, all of us have something we need to overcome. Most all of us, maybe not who was the whole person who homeschooled themselves. Someone said they had homeschooled and their kid was now in it. Anyway, who was that? That was you, Rachel, right? Yeah. And so but most of us have to fight the training that we had, which is, oh yeah, okay, you learned how to walk and talk up to, you know, age 4 or 5, but from now on, you have to learn from everybody else. You can't do anything anymore. So at one point, one of the school, we have an online course for people starting new schools, and we started over 100 schools. And at one point, one of the schools in New Jersey asked me to drive over there and demonstrate democratic process. And on my way over, I realized, oh my God, the oldest kid there is 5 years old. I'm going to have to make the whole agenda for them. Well, I'll just make it a quick story. So when I got there, I explained to them, number one, there are two reasons to have a meeting. Number one, if you have a good idea for the school, or number two, if you have a problem, something that's a problem in the school, all the hands went up. We had our agenda instantly, and I can give you examples that I'm not going to do it, but if you want to. Another thing, Seed was mentioned and Everdale Place. I actually visited them back in the day. So I was involved with alternative education all over the place from very early. I think that's enough for now.
So a couple questions from the chat that I'll mention. Diane asked, I'm thinking people would be interested in hearing about Unschooling School. Maybe Deb, you could speak about that initiative.
You know, I don't know anything about Unschooling School, so I'm gonna have to pass on that. It's on my list to try to find out what's going on there. Jerry may know them a little bit.
I can speak about what I know.
Can you?
I actually had a meeting with Heather McTaggart about a week ago to hear more about the ideas and see where Alpha and that initiative might align. But the basic idea is that we could use the IEP process within schools and have a new designation of free learner. And then kids who are designated as free learners on their IEP could, in theory, engage with the school system on their own terms and choose what they do in their school day, in conversation, of course, with the people in their school community, and an alternative graduation, sort of a portfolio upon graduating. So it's an idea of how to start infiltrating mainstream schools, which I think is a pretty interesting one. So
Diane, maybe you could tell people what an IEP is.
Individual education plan used to designate special education learners. So it may be kids with learning disabilities or so-called gifted kids, any kid who needs accommodations in how they learn or needs a different kind of education program that works for them because the school isn't offering them what they need.
I'm just going to throw one more thing in. Somebody mentioned that Parkdale is part of a land trust. Is that right? Yes. So the first 20 years of my organization, we were under a program called the School of Living. And the School of Living were the pioneers in land trust, and they still exist. They're just a small nonprofit, but it's amazing. They were involved in the beginnings of the whole organic food movement, all kinds of things like farming, and so they actually now still hold the land under a bunch of different intentional communities, and they're based in Pennsylvania. So what's the story? How does the land trust work with Parkdale?
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that really quickly. So essentially, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust is it's a nonprofit. It holds right now 2 different properties in the neighborhood. One is a small organic farm lot behind the Parkdale Public Library. The other is a rooming house, which was strategically owned to actually break up a potential blockbusting development. So it's between a couple of other rooming houses, and it was strategically bought to safeguard a certain set of rooming houses that are now going to be operated and maintained by Park. And it's been going since, it was really developed around 2014, 2015. It was part of a larger Parkdale People's Initiative, actually starting around food security. And there are several boards, community boards that people can join if they're interested in getting involved in it. So I posted the link to their homepage. But if there's any specific questions about getting involved, or if you want to know more about the committees or anything like that, just stick around after and I can talk a bit more about it.
Very interesting.
There was another question in the chat about why aren't there more Alpha schools in Toronto? And if anybody wants to field that, like maybe what the pressures are.
So you want to talk about that, Deb?
Yeah. Well, I think we can each address that in our way. I think it'd be interesting to hear a principal's point of view. Do you want to go first or shall I? Okay. Yeah. It's very interesting. It's actually quite a big part of my book. Is about the struggle to maintain a free school within the public system. And I know Jerry's tried to help a lot of public schools, public free schools all over the continent, and they don't usually survive for long. And in fact, one of the strongest and most beautiful, Windsor House, was just closed a couple of years ago after 45 years in BC, a JK to 12 free school in Vancouver. So what the alternative schools encountered from the beginning was immense bureaucratic resistance. And even while there were some actually imaginative bureaucrats who actually saw themselves as social change agents and were in the bureaucracy to try to help with this big social change that seemed to be happening in the 60s and 70s. But by and large, the administration is very, they often are people who have not actually taught in classrooms and have their own jobs and their own ways of doing things. And so there's huge resistance just on the big systemic level, like the big government level, and also just on the level of people who are afraid to lose their jobs. And I actually found a bit of a smoking gun when I was doing my research in a couple of documents that came out in the mid 80s. But I'm not going to talk about that right now, but first of all, there's always the great difficulty of starting to work democratically. And some of the people who are working in public schools have actually referred to that about kids not knowing what to do when they actually have some freedom. Parents being nervous when they see things like kids play. And it's funny, we haven't talked about play yet. And play is the most important part of a child's life. And it's where most of the learning happens, especially most of the social learning. And Peter Gray, who's on the reference list that we've included with this in the chat, Peter Gray is a great person to go to for stuff about how important play is. But a lot of parents will actually get really frightened when they're 4, 5, 6-year-old, even kids that small, kids who are actually below the usual school starting age 100 years ago, and which is now the school starting age in Finland still. When kids even under 7 were playing most of the day, parents got nervous, and it's really hard for an alternative school to stay strong enough through that nervousness and help people to have that faith. And the administration is even more, they don't understand why people would want to do this in the first place, because people who work in public systems, I think almost all sincerely and deeply believe that you really do have to stuff these kids all this information that they need and that the people who make the curriculum are these experts who know what to do. And even though it actually, most curricula, I mean, most curricula don't really make that much sense to parents. And most report cards don't make much sense to parents. But they're so frightened and they're so used to having faith in authority that it's very difficult for them to disengage even from something that they don't really relate to. And so, I mean, those are huge reasons. Most of the people involved in the school system are true believers. And think of how they would feel if they knew, once they really face the incredible damage they're doing. It would be equivalent to my people in Alberta cannot face the immense damage the oil industry is doing to this planet. So it's think of how people would feel in education systems. But I do feel it's something that needs to be faced. But Alpha, one of the things that it's really worthwhile, I really sympathize with people who say, you know, I need to be reminded why we're doing this because it's so hard, it's such a fight. The fact that all these little schools exist all over the world, we prove that it can work, we prove that they work, and that it can happen. And so it's so hard to survive. It's very difficult to do that kind of networking you were talking about, Andrew, you know, because so much of the time is spent on mere survival. But this very strange smoking gun that I found in the mid 80s was from
She just got censored.
She froze.
Mm-hmm. The smoking gun that I found.
Yeah, the smoking gun. The smoking gun froze.
Sorry, am I going on to look? Sorry.
You froze for a second there, Deb.
Okay, sorry.
When you mentioned the smoking gun, the censors who are following this. Right
on. Okay, so the smoking gun is a report by the province, and they actually did a really conscientious investigation. They spent several days at each alternative school, talked to parents, teachers, kids, administrators. And I read the report, and I'm so embarrassed. I'm going to tell you guys because it's a small group. When I wrote my thesis, like, these reports are deadly to read, but I went through, oh, geez, you know, they gave Alpha, they gave the alternative schools a pretty good review. I wonder why, you know, things didn't go better. But like, I didn't read the whole thing. It was a 30-page report. The last 10 pages were from administrators who were all nervous because they didn't know what to do, and the schools didn't need them. And the conclusion that the province came to was, well, the schools just have to figure out how to make things easier for the administrators and for the laws and the rules. They have to start complying more. And this was after 20 pages of really quite glowing reviews. So it's right there in black and white, but they haven't been yet. More alternative schools have started, and the parental pressure here is what has enabled alternative schools to stay. And they each does have its own constituency. I don't think you'd ever want a system that's all free schools, but it's pretty, I think the only reason we're still here is that the parents fight for them because the teachers have no power. And also the school system hasn't given up yet on seeing itself as democratic, but we might be getting there. This is what worries me with the province right now. You know, we might be getting there because the province could, with the sweep of a pen, make it probably impossible for the alternative schools to exist. But so far, like, when we are in a fight, we end up in a draw usually because the administration sees that the little school, which they thought was crazy, is actually kind of doing what it's supposed to be doing, and they just back off.
It's actually quite threatening to a lot of people when these schools are successful because it flies in the face of their paradigm for learning. But getting back to the idea of play, of course, I think it was Maria Montessori who said, play is the work of children, you see. But the fact is that this is where they learn how to solve problems. The more they play, the better it is. One other thing that you said about them also worried about schools not needing them. Arrow has its annual conference coming up, and it's going to be virtual for the second year, so you should go to it. And it's going to be this June. And Sugata Mitra just wrote to me today. He may be able to come, and he has keynoted for us before. The thing about Sugata's work that was scary to so many people, he's the one who put the computer in the window, you know, and on the wall, you know, next to where he was working as a programmer, just to see what kids would do. And, you know, they not only didn't know how to use computers, they didn't speak English either. They were speaking a local dialect, and he just left it there to see what would happen. And then checked later on, 2 or 3 months later, they all knew how to do everything in it. And they learned English because they had to learn that to be able to use it, and did it without a teacher. So teachers find this sometimes being very threatening, the work that he did. So he's maybe one of our keynoters. I think he's going to be able to work it out. So that's June 24th to 27th. It's Aero Conference, AERO conference.org, if you want to sign up for it.
We have a really good question from Claire in the chat. I'm interested to know whether you have any thoughts on how the existence of the internet, much of which is literally addictive for adults as well as children, affects the philosophy of giving children free choice, if there are computers available in the classroom. Any thoughts on that?
So I was wondering if maybe one of the Alpha teachers might want to respond to that, because I know it's something that they navigate on a daily basis.
I could just talk a bit about my own personal journey, I guess, as a parent around that issue. I think for younger kids, like I have a son who's 14. If we're talking about younger kids, like in elementary school, I wouldn't want just free access to the internet all day long in there. But I've really come around, basically. My son decided to stay home from school partway through grade 7. I mean, with his parents, with us, and so was unschooling for half of grade 7 and all of grade 8, and he's back in grade 9 now. And I was very concerned about the negative impact of video games and just screen in general. But with a lot of research and particularly there's a podcast called Living Joyfully, hosted by Pam Laricchia, who is just outside of Toronto, living just outside of Toronto, but she's an unschooling educator, I guess you could say, parent, who's very influential, I guess, in North America and probably even globally. I listen to a lot of parents talk about how their older kids, like maybe 10 and up, I don't know where you would put the age, but that they just, through following their interests, still the same mantra applies, did learn and grow and gain all these skills. So I found it to be the case. Like my son was really just glued to the computer for a year and a half and gaming and watching YouTube videos. And I was like, oh my God, is he gonna be okay? And he decided to go back to grade 9 and he's doing great. And it doesn't seem to matter that he missed all those classes. It doesn't, you know, he's engaged, and he learned so much from video gaming. Like, I can actually see that he did. And it's about decision making and passionate engagement and knowing who he is as a person. Like, I actually think it did him good. He has an identity as a gamer, right? And he's developing himself in those ways. Lots of things are addictive. You know, what is addiction really? It's escapism. It's, I mean, we turn to all kinds of different substances and activities and ways of being that are a way to escape from reality. So I actually, I've really moved my position on video games and screen as a result of parenting the particular son I have, where I think there's too much fear around children in the internet, actually. I think, yeah, I think other than sort of the physical health concerns around damaging the eyes or something, and being sedentary, you know, you got to get up, you got to get outside and get some fresh air. But I think kids can learn a ton from the internet.
Could I just follow up on that briefly? I've interviewed some of the original students of SEED, and for them, that was computers was a huge part of their concept of the future of learning. Many of them were computer nerds back in the day when you had to write out the cards and stuff, but they said there'll come a day when there's just so much knowledge available that people will be able to go to access it. Me, I'm not a fan of a lot of screens for little kids, but this exploratory use is among the older ones. Well, for sure, don't we all do it? And surgeons apparently have to go through gaming now. You can't become one of those laser micro surgeons if you're not a pretty proficient at gaming.
So I just wanted to address kind of a little bit about the sort of intersection with traditional schooling, as somebody who's been in a whole bunch of different alternative schools. One of the things that I've discovered about, because my mother as an educator was part of the experiential active learning movement, which spawned a lot of alternative schools. And she was actually part of the creation of University Elementary in Calgary, which was at the time an alternative program. And what I think happened is there was a whole bunch of experiments at that time, which then became integrated into regular education models in lots of ways. And so my experience as an alternative school educator has often been that we create what we do. It's kind of like what Jerry was talking about. What we do is we create things, ideas and concepts that begin to infect, as it were, traditional schooling. And then traditional schooling doesn't look like traditional schooling, right? Traditional schooling, even in a regular school these days, looks very different than it did when I was a kid in school. And a lot of that is due to the influence of those thinkers and of the people who did alternative schooling. And it continues to have that kind of impact as we develop those concepts. So what I have done a lot in even navigating between traditional school and alternative schools has been to bring some of those ideas in as an educator to spaces that would be less like that, to develop that free thinking in kids and support the understanding of those parents that that is possible, right? And that actually will lead them somewhere, will lead those students somewhere. There is an organization I wanted to mention, which is a group of alternative schools that do come together in the Toronto District School Board. It's called the Alternative School Advisory Committee. So there is some opportunity for parents, and it's a parent organization. It meets with the board, but it is parents who come to that organization and parents who set that agenda. And there are alternative school parents from not just elementary schools, but high schools as well. So I just wanted to note that it has a whole lot of work it could be doing. And I think Deb is right that a lot of work is spent on survival and on just trying to figure out how to keep oriented in the direction they want to orient, given the pressures that come from the system that they're operating within. But it is a way to have a voice as a group of alternative schools and a networking opportunity as a group of alternative schools. So the last piece that we wanted to do was really, so if people want to just say maybe a short sentence or a few words about if this series were to continue, we were to do more work on this in this particular series, Democracy in Free Schools, what are some of the things that you might like to learn? So I'm not going to necessarily call on each person, but if you have something you would want to put out, I also have taken notes on some of the themes that emerged as people were sharing. But if there's anything else that you'd like to say, that what other things you'd like to learn about, that would be great to know.
Yeah, I'm really curious to learn more about the consensus-based decision-making process that takes place. Like, if it does take place in the classroom, you know, what does that look like? Like, even as granular as like, okay, are we going to play Frisbee or soccer? And how does a class, you know, instead of just vote and the majority wins, like what does that look like? In addition to weightier questions.
Are there any people here who would like to know or understand better whether it's possible to do democratic process in their classroom?
I mean, I feel like that's my question. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, my answer is yes. That is my question.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the examples I like to give of that is the fact that, as you can see, I'm a table tennis player, and I like to teach table tennis. And I was at a local conservative, authoritarian Boys and Girls Club teaching table tennis, and the table tennis club was democratic. So I thought I learned an awful lot from this experience. For example, there was a rule that the club had that you can only eat in a certain place where these tables were. And the kids decided this was inconvenient for them and it was messing up our meeting. And they passed a rule that it would be okay to eat in the meeting. For example, basically pizzas that were brought in, and they would bring them into the meeting. And one day when they were eating their pizzas, the door flew open. And one of the staff members said, "You can't eat in here." And the kids said, "We can too, we passed it." And he apologized and left. So I was just wondering when that was gonna be confronted, and democracy won. The kids felt so empowered that they just needed to tell them, "Hey, we passed it," you know? But the bottom line is this: you just have to know what kinds of decisions the kids can absolutely make in whatever situation you're in. And then they can, as long as it's not overturned by anybody or nobody has the possibility of doing that, then they will experience democratic decision-making process.
Yeah, I would echo that. It has to do sometimes, especially working in a public school system where there are places where the kids can't make the decision. It's just important that they know what those boundaries are, so that when they can make a decision, it's a decision that can be upheld.
Okay, we can't overcome state and federal laws and decisions that the school made for us.
Yeah. So anything else that people would really, before we end, would really like to know? Claire?
My own background before becoming a teacher was in adult ed, in conflict resolution, among other things. And I've been really interested in doing conflict resolution, mediation kind of stuff with the kids. And I would love to hear more about you and Deb's thoughts on that if you were doing a series to explore that in more depth.
Yeah, that would be great. It's a lot, but there are some really great great examples, and even just in my time at Alpha, I've seen that process really grow. Deb apologizes, her internet was unstable and she got booted out.
I had maybe a question. I'm interested to know if other people would be interested in the kind of granular history of really learning the people who have been involved in Alpha, not just now, but the larger history, the people who pushed for it, the institutions who pushed for it, that kind of deep, community history, I feel like is really important. But are there other people on the call who would be, want to support that? I mean, it's up to other people.
Yeah, and I would add, I don't know if this is really the group of people that wants to talk about this, but I'm just forever interested in discussions around sort of teacher practice in a democratic environment. There are so many of these sort of just terms like emergent curriculum and learner-centered, and so many of them seem to be talking about what we're trying to do at Alpha. And then it's very interesting, I think, how we try to straddle the idea of a free school, but also having kids graduate who are going to be able to just handle grade 7, and also sort of handle the anxieties of parents and kids as they get closer to graduating. So just how we do it, how we program in a way that actually makes space for kids to direct their learning to some extent, because really at Alpha, the downstairs kids have a lot less control over their time than the upstairs kids do. And I just think that's interesting to keep talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is, I don't know quite how to frame this as a question, but I'm interested, kind of as Zia was saying, and a few of others have mentioned too, that as we become fearful, we tend to lose, the trust that we have in kids. And also, over time, this goes back to also what Andrew was saying, sort of the history of how, the people that started Alpha and how it's evolved over time. How do we hold on to the essence of the free school movement and not let our fear sort of dilute the process as new people come in, and maybe their attachment to sort of the essence of that is not as strong, or fears set in about, okay, yeah, our kids are getting closer to grade 7, and should we now suddenly be worried about how they're going to transition? And we lose sort of that trust in their ability to learn what they need and get what they need from their own, just their own being in this space and in this world. So I'm wondering, because I find this really inspirational to talk to everybody and have that and feel that kind of renewed sense of things. And how do we do that for others that are part of this, who maybe haven't sought out this venue to have these conversations, but I'm not quite sure how to make this into, a part of the series, but just how the free school movement doesn't get diluted, how we don't lose, what we find so meaningful.
It's an important question, Rachel. And I've seen it happen in alternative schools as much as traditional schools have learned from alternative schools. Traditional schools have also co-opted alternative schools over the years. And so that many of, Toronto's original alternative schools either have died or they've become so similar to the mainstream schools that they're in that it's sort of, why are they even at alternative schools anymore, right? So it's a very important question, I think. So we're just about at time. Thanks everybody for coming, and we really enjoyed having this opportunity. I know it was Deb's desire, she said her dream was like to teach about free school at a free school. It was like, this is the best. The only thing that would make it better is if I got paid. And so I can echo that. For me, democratic education, even when I was working in a traditional system, was always the center of what I was trying to do with my students. So I'm really, really excited to have spent this little bit of time with you, and stay tuned. There may be more.
And I'd just like to say, yeah, thanks to Miriam and to Jerry and Deb, who had to leave early, for taking the time. I think this has been a really good conversation. And I'll be posting the recording, if anybody's interested, on the Parkdale Free School website, which I had shared before, and I'll just share it one more time in case anybody needs it. But otherwise, have a great night.
Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
This was great. Thank you.
Have a great evening.